You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and let's start today with a case out of Denver, Colorado, suburbs of Denver, Colorado, where a verdict has been reached in the Alexa Bartell murder trial. Now, I want to highlight something with this case before we start. All victims are victims. No matter if they put themselves in a dangerous situation, if they say stay with an abuser, or if they dabble in illegal activities, a victim is a victim. But in Alexa's story, she was driving a car at an appropriate speed, talking on the phone with her girlfriend, Jenna. She wasn't doing anything that should have put her in a difficult position. 20-year-old Alexa wasn't out there behaving mischievously. She was such a lover of people that she even had the Bible verse from Luke 6:27 tattooed on her arm. The verse reads, "Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you." Well, on this April of 2023 night, just outside of Denver, Jenna and Alexa were chatting on the phone because they were planning their evening together. Jenna was just finishing up work at Old Chicago as a server, and Alexa had said goodnight to her mother, Kelly, and was headed to Jenna's. Alexa had borrowed her dad's girlfriend's car, a yellow Chevy Spark, because her Jeep Liberty was in the shop. While they were discussing their plans for the night, Jenna said the call just went dead between her and Alexa. As she tried to call her back, it was as if the phone wasn't operational. Jenna, kind of, fighting that inner voice, was trying to convince her mind that nothing's wrong. She was telling herself that maybe Alexa got mad at me and threw her phone out the window. You know those irrational things you tell yourself when things just aren't checking out, when they're not adding up? You believe there's gotta be some explanation that doesn't involve Alexa being hurt or in harm's way? Well, Jenna kept watching Alexa's phone location on Find Friends. And to Jenna, it seemed like the phone wasn't moving and that it was kind of off to the side of the road, slightly away from where it should have been. Okay, so it makes sense she would invent an idea like maybe Alexa threw her phone out the window. But Jenna couldn't fight that nagging feeling, so she left work in search of Alexa. Jenna first called her home to see if Alexa had possibly shown up there, but she hadn't. Jenna then called a mutual friend named Jordan, but Jordan hadn't heard from Alexa either. Then Jenna called Alexa's mom, Kelly. She said something like, "I'm sorry I'm calling you. I'm probably panicking, but I can't get a hold of Alexa. We were talking on the phone and the call dropped, and now I can't get her to answer." Well, Jenna then told Kelly that she had checked Alexa's location and she was on Indiana Street, but her green dot wasn't moving. Jenna was traveling toward that dot when she came up on the yellow Spark. She could see that the car had careened off the road, broken through a fence, and come to a rest in the neighboring field. Jenna followed the exact same path. She drove right through that hole in the fence and parked next to Alexa's car. Before Jenna even exited her car, she could see the massive hole in the driver's side windshield. Whatever had hit the car had not only broken the windshield, but it also dented the side of the car where the metal meets the glass. Jenna called 911. Alexa's mother, Kelly, was headed to the same green dot on Find Friends. Jenna said she exited her car and she could see that Alexa was slumped over the steering wheel with a visible and bloodied head wound. When a Broomfield officer arrived on scene and assessed Alexa, he found no pulse, and Alexa was said to be cold to his touch. Inside the car, investigators found what they described as biological matter, meaning, and I say this very tenderly, parts of Alexa's brain were scattered in the car. Now, near the car, the same investigators spotted a large river rock generally used in landscaping. It shouldn't have been there, and that rock was stained with blood. To investigators, it seemed a rock had been hurled at Alexa's car, striking her head through the windshield and killing her nearly instantly. Their assumptions were validated when they reviewed reports from other motorists that night who were near Indiana Street and had experienced having river rocks thrown at their cars as they were driving. Sheriff's investigators began examining secured cell phone data that had pinged off 4 nearby towers. See, they've got a leg up here. It's Jenna. She and Alexa were on the phone together, so they aren't guessing at a time of death. They aren't guessing at the time when the rock smashed through the windshield. And when they cross-referenced the exact time of impact with that exact location, one other phone was passing Alexa's car. And that phone was linked to two names, 18-year-old Joseph Koenig and his mother, Lara Koenig. But that's not enough for an arrest. So Broomfield investigators got another assist, this time from 20-year-old Joseph Bopp. He's kind of a friend of Joseph Koenig, just, casual. But he had a story to tell from that April night. He said he had witnessed Joseph Koenig and 20-year-old Mitch Karolchik and 18-year-old Zachary Kwok gathering heavy river rocks from a landscaping out front of a local Walmart. The three young men were putting the rocks in the back seat of Mitch's truck. Joseph Bopp wasn't really into this. He told investigators he knew something bad was going down, so he stopped hanging out with the three. He actually asked them to drop him off at his house. He just wanted to distance himself from their plans. Joseph Bopp's explanation of the night, combined with the cell phone data, allowed the detectives to use that information to, try and get the three young men to turn on each other. And unsurprisingly, they turned on each other. So we've got Mitch's Chevy Silverado pickup. But Joseph Koenig is driving that pickup, and as they're approaching Alexa's oncoming car, Mitch told detectives that Zachary, who's in the back seat, threw the 9-pound river rock and connected with Alexa's windshield. Mitch said Zachary celebrated like this was a perfectly thrown touchdown pass. Mitch said Zachary was so excited and demanded that they turn the truck around to get a closer look at the damage they had caused. According to the original statements, Joseph Koenig did as he was told, turning the truck around and slowly creeping past Alexa's car so that Zachary could take a photo of the damage. So we've got Mitch, singing to detectives, telling his story and pointing the finger at Zachary. When Zachary was confronted with Mitch's statement, he changed his story. He had initially said he couldn't remember any of the night, but now, in his revised statement, he said Joseph and Mitch were the excited ones and that he took the photo because he thought they would want a, quote, memento from the night. Zachary also said the two other young men were saying that the three of them were now blood brothers and that their secrets needed to follow them to their graves. Zachary also claimed that Joseph had tracked him down the day after the rock throwing and insisted that the three get their story straight. Well, now this is when all the finger pointing accelerated. All three men were charged with first-degree murder, but over the last year and a half, two of the three took plea deals, and that included lesser charges, and the stories have changed even more. So let's start with it. Zachary maintained he was in the back passenger side of the truck with the rocks and that he didn't throw any of the rocks that evening. He said his job that night was to gather rocks and place them next to his seat in the back and then to hand the rocks to Joseph, who was driving, and Mitch, who was in the front passenger seat. Now, Mitch was telling investigators that the celebratory whooping and hollering was just normal for all of them, that all three of them celebrated, but it was actually just about the hits and the misses. He said none of them even acknowledged that people were inside of the cars. Well, data from the truck and testimony at trial highlighted that several times during the rock throwing that night, the truck, the Chevy Silverado, was traveling at 80 miles per hour, and that when the 9-pound rock was thrown at Alexa's car, the truck had sped up to 103 miles per hour. So which two took the deal? Zachary pled guilty to 3 assault charges, 1 assault charge for Alexa's death and 2 other assault charges for other victims from that night. He testified that Joseph threw the rock and also orchestrated the cover-up. All right, that's 1 down. We got 1 to go. Was it Joseph or Mitch who took the second plea deal? It was Mitch. Mitch pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and a crime of violence. His plea deal wasn't as favorable because he was involved in 2 other evenings earlier in 2023 where he and Joseph had thrown rocks at oncoming cars. Now, Mitch also threw rocks on the night in question. See, Zachary's saying he didn't. Mitch is saying he did. Both men are facing sentencings for those plea deals next week. So that leaves us with Joseph. At the trial for Joseph that took place last week, Zachary testified that he remembered Mitch screaming for Joseph to go faster, faster, when they realized they had just one rock left and that Alexa's rock was going to be the last rock of the night. The boys had already thrown 9 other rocks, and Zachary testified that he had previously passed the rock up to Mitch, and then when they saw Alexa's approaching headlights, Mitch passed the rock to Joseph, who prepared to throw the rock out his open driver's window. During Mitch's testimony at Joseph's trial, he told the jurors he and Joseph were best friends, close enough to be brothers, and that's why during 3 of his 4 interviews with detectives, Mitch had told them it was all Zachary's doing. But it was during that 4th interview where he changed his story. Okay, it's important to know, during that 4th interview, that plea deal was being offered to Mitch. Now, in Mitch's 4th interview, he said he and Joseph had planned to pin it all on Zachary, and that Zachary wasn't really part of their group. He was just a casual friend, so he was the easy fall guy. But this story that Mitch is, testifying to in trial, it's not really tidy. Because during his testimony last week, he told jurors that he hadn't lied during his first 3 interviews. He said he was sure it was Zachary that had thrown the rock, but that he finally came to the realization it was Joseph who threw it. Now, can I pause here? This rock is the size of a small basketball, not a regulation size basketball, but more like a Nerf basketball size. So if you're looking at a ball that's that big, it's not like you can hide it. Plus, it's 9 pounds. Now, a man's hand could palm this rock, but I'm not really sure how you wouldn't be able to realize who threw the rock. So I don't understand Mitch's first 3 interviews. Now, Mitch also, on the stand, said he remembered that he and Zachary had a conversation about how the rock was probably too big to throw. All right, this added commentary by Mitch on the stand was not working out so well for the prosecution. They needed Joseph to be a part of this. And while Mitch is talking about a conversation between him and Zachary, then that's just implicating him and Zachary. It's not implicating Joseph. Well, the prosecution had some cleaning up to do with Mitch's testimony. In redirect, they hammered at Mitch to say more than once that Joseph threw the rock. They needed to get that out there. There didn't need to be conversation between Zachary and Mitch. There needed to be confirmation that Joseph threw the rock. Well, when it came time for the defense to put on their case, they did not ask Joseph to testify. And before I tell you the verdict, I feel like I need to point out something. Okay, so Joseph's driving this Chevy, right? High rate of speed, heavy rock in his hand. Almost seems impossible to hurdle that rock and connect with Alexa's windshield. Well, Joseph is left-handed, and he allegedly threw the rock from his shoulder, shot put style. All right, after 2 weeks of testimony and 7 hours of deliberation, Joseph was found guilty of 19 charges, the largest of which was the first-degree murder charge for Alexa's death. After the verdict on Friday, Kelly, that's Alexa's mom, who was wearing Alexa's favorite color of blue, told reporters that it was hard to be happy or even feel satisfied that justice was served because her daughter's amazing life was lost and 3 other young men's lives were permanently changed. She said she can't celebrate any of that. Now, Jenna, Alexa's girlfriend, first off, her testimony was just heartbreaking. Second off, her TikTok account is loaded with cute videos and pics of the 2 who had been together for 2 years when Alexa was killed. You guys, I can't imagine what images haunt Jenna's dreams. So, who knows what the real story is here? Justice has been determined that Joseph threw the rock, that Mitch was more culpable in the crimes than Zachary, and that the 3 men are slated to spend decades and decades behind bars when they are sentenced next week. Zachary will spend anywhere from 20 to 32 years in prison. Mitch will spend anywhere from 35 to 72 years in prison. And Joseph will most likely spend his life behind bars. And Alexa, well, she was just driving her car on a normal night, trying to arrive at her girlfriend's house. Let me know in the comments what you think about this story. Now to New Hampshire, where a man has been sentenced for the killing of his wife on their first wedding anniversary celebration trip. And why not have another man named Joseph in today's podcast? We had 2 in the first story, and now we have 44-year-old Joseph Ferlazzo. He and 22-year-old Emily Schwartz met in 2020, and it was all kinds of a whirlwind. Emily, a registered nurse, moved to Vermont to live with Joseph shortly after they met, and then the two married 4 months later. Joseph is kind of unconventional. He's employed as a tattoo artist, and he convinces Emily to live in a converted bus on her parents' property. Emily's family wasn't thrilled, but Emily is an adult doing very adult things, including participating in a polyamorous relationship. All of that, at least according to Joseph. Now, the whole marriage was so unconventional that Emily hadn't even met some of Joseph's family. So, for their first anniversary in October of 2021, Emily and Joseph packed up their converted bus that, by the way, was named Roaming Rosie, and traveled to Bolton, Vermont to a family reunion for Joseph's family. Kind of half anniversary trip, half reunion. On October 15th, as the two kind of retired for bed that night, elevated confrontation ensued. The two were fighting about the conversion of the bus, the plan to travel cross-country in the bus, van, home hybrid, and Emily said she didn't want to do that anymore, and she didn't really want to be with Joseph anymore. That would be a tough conversation, and one that would potentially get heated. But what were the ripple effects of that confrontation? Well, Emily was stabbed over a dozen times and shot twice in the face. Her body was then dismembered and placed in trash bags. Joseph packed up Roaming Rosie and left the bus at a friend's house. He returned to New Hampshire without his wife. Oh my goodness, the Gabby Petito vibes here. Now remember, Joseph and Emily live on the property belonging to Emily's parents. They know Joseph has returned without their daughter. When questioned about where Emily was by his in-laws, Joseph said they got in an argument while in Vermont and Emily just stormed off claiming she was getting an Uber. Joseph told Emily's parents he figured she would have Ubered back to their home by now. And Emily's parents, well, they're confused. They have cryptic messages from Emily sent after the night of the argument. Yeah, we've got more Gabby Petito vibes here. And in these text messages to family, she claims she's just blowing off steam after a fight. Now, the fight part's checking out. Emily's mother had heard the two arguing during a phone call just hours before Emily's suspected death. Emily's mother couldn't deny the feeling of dread in her soul. Now, Joseph has, quote, proof that he is reaching out to Emily. Joseph is sending texts to Emily's phone after her murder. She isn't responding to him, but he is sending multiple texts to her phone. They say things like, babe, or what are you doing? Talk to me, please. Then another that said, where are you, lovey? Then another message explaining about the transmission on the bus just having an issue, not working quite right. And then there was another message that read he was going to spend time with Nikki. We don't know who Nikki is at this point, but Nikki. And then exacerbation in this text reading, WTF, babe. A message was finally sent telling her to get her ass home and that he is heading back to New Hampshire. But just hours later, he tells her he loves her. Then he sends another message to Emily's phone calling Emily an asshole and telling her he doesn't deserve this treatment. All right, all of this is occurring after she is dead. And Joseph knows she's dead. Emily's parents filed a missing persons report just days after she left for Vermont. And then, hours later, one of Joseph's friends blew the lid off the case. Joseph's friend, Spencer Lemons, lives in Vermont. And Joseph and Spencer met up late one night, just days after the death of Emily. Joseph said he needed help in getting Roaming Rosie, who was parked at a friend's house, in Vermont. So he's like, dude, take me. I got to go get my bus. So Spencer drove Joseph to the converted bus. But when they got there, 4 patrol vehicles were surrounding Roaming Rosie. Spencer said Joseph told him to just keep on driving. Soft-spoken and nature lover Spencer said, "Nah, we're not going to do that. Tell me what's going on." As they traveled past the bus and went on about a mile or so down the road, Spencer said a fidgety Joseph told him Emily was hurt and she was inside that bus. At this point, Spencer pulled over, kicked Joseph out of his Honda Civic, and when he drove away, he left Joseph on the edge of the road, and Spencer called 911 and told the dispatcher what Joseph had just admitted to. That call led to the convergence of the search of the bus and the arrest of Joseph. Inside the bus, police found 8 large plastic trash bags stacked inside the cramped bathroom facility. 7 of the bags contained parts of Emily's body. Police also recovered the saw, which they believed was used to dismember Emily in the bathroom shower. When Joseph was questioned by police, he had a story. He said the argument started over the lighting of a candle. That all happened outside of the bus. And when they retired to the bus for the evening, the argument continued and then escalated when Emily allegedly threw a red pillow at Joseph. Here, we're going to skip ahead to the trial where Joseph testified. I want you to hear the explanation of the night in his words.
And she pulls her hand out with the Taurus. And
how were you feeling?
I was feeling horrified. Just
were
like,
you afraid?
I was terrified. Like there was as soon as I saw that, I just felt like this wave of heat, just like red hot. And she started pushing her body up in an instant, and I'm like, no. And I don't know, she wasn't stopping. And I was holding my Glock, and she started just coming up at me, and I just fired.
Joseph's claim is he had his gun in his hand and she had a gun under her pillow. His lawyer said the shock of the self-defense shooting led Joseph to do just bizarre things, like dismember his wife and fake texts from his phone. His lawyer claimed that Joseph's wild behavior over the next 3 days was strictly a result of the trauma from defending his life. Now, I want to point out some of the bizarre behavior. During the next day, Joseph did a 3-hour tattoo on someone. His hands were steady enough to complete a 3-hour tattoo. He also helped his sister. Then he had drinks with others, and he even had breakfast with family just hours after killing his wife, and he acted through all of it as if nothing was wrong. For the jury, this turned out to not be a case of, did he do it? Because he admitted he did it right there on the stand. I played it for you. This became a case about self-defense and a broken mind. Joseph's attorney called a forensic psychologist who testified that Joseph had elements of a personality disorder. His attorney, in closing arguments, said this behavior was heightened because Emily was the abuser. He claimed she had been abusing Joseph since day one, and that on the night of the murder, she kept kicking him in the groin. Now, the prosecution said if Emily was the abuser, why didn't Joseph have any bruises or abrasions on him when he was arrested? The state also reminded the jurors that the self-defense claim bloomed over the months following his arrest. It wasn't initially what he said happened. Initially, he just copped to the murder. He copped to the dismemberment. It wasn't until later that he said it all happened because he feared for his life. Well, the jury of 7 women and 5 men didn't believe his claim, and they found Joseph guilty of the highest charge of first-degree murder. All right, all of that trial happened in December, and last week, the judge sentenced Joseph to 42 and a half years in prison. Now, there's one more part of this case. Emily's family wasn't going to let this rest. A few months after Joseph was arrested and kept in jail without bail for Emily's murder, her family filed a wrongful death civil lawsuit. The civil lawsuit was actually settled before his criminal trial even started. A judge in the civil suit awarded Adrienne Bass, that's Emily's mother, $1.5 million in damages for Emily's death. Okay, it's very clear Joseph doesn't have that kind of money, but Adrian said it wasn't about the money. It was about getting a judgment on record as a form of justice for her daughter. Okay, I know I said there was only one more thing, but there's actually another. And to be accurate, there's actually another death in this case. Clear back in 2009, Joseph's stepmother, Young Hee Lim Ferlazzo, was stabbed to death in her home in Pennsylvania. Joseph's father, Joseph Sr., was extensively questioned by police, but he was released. Joseph Sr. said he had been out grocery shopping in the middle of the night, and when he returned to the home, he found his wife dead. Now, the case is still open and unsolved with no arrests. It seems Joseph Sr. owned a massage parlor that allegedly provided more than massages, if you get what I mean. And 1 year after Young Hee's death, the massage parlor was raided, and several women were arrested for prostitution. Young Hee worked as the massage parlor manager. Well, there is a whole lot of complication in these people's lives. I'd love to hear what you think about this case. Now, a quick update to the tragic end of life circumstances for one of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers. 41-year-old Virginia Giuffre ended her own life last week. The suicide was a tragic end to a life filled with abuse and also an end to a bizarre year. So let's tackle the difficulties that Virginia experienced over just the last few months. Back on March 30th, Virginia made headlines when she posted on her Instagram that she was in renal failure. She was covered in bruises all over her face. She said she had been involved in an accident and had been struck by a school bus that was going nearly 50 miles per hour. She told followers that she had just days to live and that she was under the care of a kidney specialist. Days later, saying she needed to set the record straight, she came forward with abuse allegations against her husband of 22 years. She told the media that she had been abused for years by Robert and that back in January of this year, she had finally become brave enough to file assault claims against her husband Robert with Australian police. No official charges were filed by law enforcement. Those two have 3 children together, ages 19, 16, and 15. This clearly wasn't the first time she had spoken out about abuse in her life. Back in 2000, Virginia was just 16 years old when she was recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell to work for Jeffrey Epstein. Virginia has long claimed that the pair groomed her and forced her to have sex with Epstein and other visitors to Epstein's homes, all of it being part of an elaborate sex ring. Virginia said she escaped the Epstein home after 2 years of abuse. Virginia claimed she had been trafficked to Prince Andrew and other rich and powerful men. Prince Andrew has denied all of the wrongdoing. When Ghislaine was found guilty and imprisoned, Virginia told Instagram followers that her soul had yearned for justice for years. She also expressed love to the many girls who had experienced what she said she had experienced. How Virginia ended her life in Australia, well, it's not been released. And unless the police think foul play was involved, how she did this isn't really any of our business. Currently, police and family are calling the death self-inflicted. Now, Virginia had settled a civil lawsuit against Prince Andrew back in 2021. In that lawsuit, she said Prince Andrew had forced her to have sex 3 different times, once in London, once in New York, and once on Epstein's Island. The amount of the settlement was never disclosed. Virginia's representative, Dinny Von Muffling, told the press that Virginia was a most extraordinary human being, calling her deeply loving, wise, and funny. She said Virginia was always more concerned about her than she was about herself. Now, we've talked a lot about abuse in this episode. Please remember, if you or someone you care about is suffering abuse, you can reach out to thehotline.org, or you can dial 988 in America if you or someone you know is threatening self-harm. Now to dozens of comments from last week's episode about the Las Vegas veterinarian who was found dead in Lake Mead after facing a social media firestorm for kicking a horse. Wow, you guys were all over the place with your responses. Some of you, like AFF on YouTube, said you should never leave your pets alone, no matter their size, warning everyone that we shouldn't give people a chance to make us regret our absence. And Petty Kitty, well, she said, like so many others, that this was clearly abuse, that the vet did kick the horse and it was uncalled for. Now, Casey said there is never a reason to kick a horse, but others said that this tactic does have an explanation and that horses can be deadly with their enormous bodies and sometimes aggressive attitudes. I think everything that was said could be validated. I could probably argue any of your cases. Here's what I do wish. I wish that the firestorm that the vet received via social media had not been so hateful. Our hate shouldn't match the vet's perceived abuse. We can call it out. We just don't need to call it out in hateful terms. We probably could have done it better with a result of maybe just suspension of his license or a change in his business. I don't know. Death is just such a brutal end. And then to the Jackson Cradle case, where the young man was, quote, found dead in the middle of the road in Illinois by 2 off-duty law enforcement officials. I purposely played all of those calls. You know I don't like to do that, but I played all 3 calls because we needed to hear it. It is so important to the case. Carol on YouTube said the dispatcher pissed her off. And Heather, I get it, Carol. And Heather said we shouldn't call them professionals because they aren't. And then so many of you caught the slip by the deputy where he calls Jackson an it. They couldn't even give him the dignity of figuring out who he was. And then Amanda on YouTube floated a potential law in reference to the 72-year-old woman who ran over the mother and her 2 sons. She said we need driver's license reviews once a person reaches a certain age. Okay, I know this is happening in several states, just in varying degrees. States like Illinois have drivers take a test after the age of 87. Okay, that's several years past June's age, so that wouldn't even have helped in Florida. And then California drivers over 70, well, they have to renew their licenses in person and take a special vision test. And then there's other states, just a few, there's more, but states like Maine, Florida, and Utah, they have older drivers renewing their licenses more frequently than younger drivers. Like in my state, I can go 8 years without even stepping foot in the DMV, and it might even be longer now. It's just so easy to extend your driver's license. Well, in those states that I mentioned, the time is much shorter. You have to actually be visually present to a DMV worker before you can get your license renewed. All right, that's your Monday episode of Rise in Crime. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing these cases with me. You guys have been so active and so a part of the podcast for just the last few weeks. It just makes me so excited. So thank you so much. Please share either this episode or a recent episode that you loved with a friend. That would help the podcast continue to grow. And thank you for your case suggestions. I'm actually searching one out of Canada and one out of Europe right now. So hopefully we can get those brought to you. We love 5-star reviews and positive comments here at Oh No Media. So make sure you like and follow us on all of our accounts. That's Murder with My Husband, Into the Dark, and of course, Rise in Crime. Join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.